Okay. Okay. You're on, folks. So, I have an amazing announcement to make. We have been doing this for 3 years. I can't believe it, but May 2020 was the first one. I'm absolutely amazed. And some of you have been here for every single one. And a few of you have been here almost all of them. And I think it's amazing. I don't know how I'm still awake, alive, or both. Okay. Joanne, are you going to put your video on, please? Can you hear me?
Where is the camera?
Would you like to put your video on? Thank you very much. Hi, Joanne, how are you? Good to see you. Right, off we go. So, okay. So, 3 years. Okay. The past, was it or is it? It's a very simple question.
Up here.
And an extremely...
Up here, the video icon. Up here to turn it on and off.
Okay, I muted whoever it is. Okay, let me go. It's a very easy question. It is a very, very difficult answer indeed. The question goes as deep as we wish to go. It is about reality, about is and was and all that. What is or might be. So when I talk about science this evening, the scientists, please excuse me, it'll be too simple for you, and you will correct me most probably. For the others, it's not a talk about science, it's about connected with what affects us. And science and time affects us all the time. There are things that we generally take for granted. Taking things for granted is relaxing, but problematic in that it avoids change and possible progress. Not taking things for granted goes against the majority and also makes you unpopular, which I often am. Today, I will mention a few things I don't take for granted and I question them. I can only touch a few. The others perhaps you can give. Since people from so many... Hi there, Maurice. You're late. Don't do it again. So you come from different countries, from different professions, and etc. You always have something to give that I can't, mainly because there isn't enough time, and also because I don't know as much as many of you do in your particular professions. So one of the things I do is to explain in human language things that are explained through mathematics. It is taken for granted that maths is a way of explaining nature. I see it differently. Sorry, scientists. Maths is a language that replaces our natural language and sets out to explain reality in a better way. That's the theory of it. That might be so, but it comes at a cost. For a start, maths is, i.e., it shows a deep manifestation of what is. Sometimes maths works, but reality, our perception of what might be real, doesn't. Notice I said might be real. If it does, there is no way of contradicting what it shows. And we are forced sometimes to fit in reality, the way we see it, to the equations. So basically, I try to reconcile science, which is physics, and philosophy. When I talk about science today, I will actually be referring to something very much wider. My aim is not to simplify physics, but rather to connect it to human understanding. So an example of is it or was it is in the most widespread version of quantum mechanics, the so-called Copenhagen version, that the properties of atoms and elementary particles are created only by our reactions to them. That is, they appear only when we find them, when we measure them. These physicists are called, for example, by physicist Lee Smolin, anti-realists. But why are they anti-realists? Because to be a realist, one would have to ascribe the properties of atoms as inherent. In other words, to objectify atoms and particles as having nothing to do with humans around. I compare this to the solid world, where I say that objects in general do not exist until we know about them. You might not like that, but there you go. Another example, physics, for example, through mass can show that time doesn't exist, or that time doesn't have to move forwards. That goes totally against what we feel and what we know, in inverted commas, about time. So did the past happen, or is it happening? What we're asking is, what is really happening? And what can we mean by asking that question? Do things happen, or did they happen? I'm wondering if we can ask the question. I really am wondering, by the way. Generally, we take for granted that things are happening now, that we are experiencing now. I maintain that everything happened in the past. I call it the backward moving now. Those who read my book, Time to Tell, will know what I'm talking about, and I spell it out in quite a long way to be understood. But very, 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 very within a second, less than a second, I want to say that whatever happens, if I go like this, you can't tell me when that happens. It's gone. Everything's gone. Now is just too small to alight upon. So if you think of it that way, everything takes on a different hue. What we actually are thinking about is so-called reality, i.e. what was real. So when I ask, did the past happen or is it happening? This is not a question about a theory of time, but about a different version of reality. I don't want to bore you, but I'm just going to be very, very, very quickly give you some theories of time, but very, very quickly. There's presentism, which is only the present exists. This is the most widely accepted. Of course, it's a very you live the moment, and now has become and always was a spiritual mantra. There's eternalism, which is past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. There is the block universe in which there is no difference between the present, the past, and the future. This is not, as far as I'm concerned, how time works. How can anything be referred to if it is not referred to by a human someone? There is the growing block universe where the past and the present exist, but the future does not. And then there is something called pastism, which you've never heard of, but it's my version. Only the past exists. And when I say exists, it itself is a problem.
You know, we have a good friend now in Israel.
Oh, Isaac and Ruth, you made it. Well done. Okay, so only the past exists. The basic intuition behind realism is that there exists a reality that is totally independent of our representations of it. That has enormous consequences because, among other consequences, it lends support to the idea of some sort of conception of truth, and we're all in favor of truth. So, anti-realism is an underhanded, unfair description. In my terms, I'm not anti-realistic because that would imply that there is such a thing as real.
Spanish rice. If not, you go to the market and buy a bunch.
Randy's been. Okay. My point is that reality has to somehow be part of what we as humans know, and what we know changes. In other words, reality changes. Temporary reality cannot be reality. It's not a matter of whether a real world is true or false. My point is that we can never get to reality per se, so that even talking about a possible real world makes no sense. When we ask, is it or was it, we are talking about memory. Are memories now? When is now? So we can learn from the past, but we cannot change it. That's what I hear. But I would question that, obviously. We can learn from a past that we know about, that is, remember, but we change memory. And so we have changed the past. I read this somewhere. I learn from the past, see the present for how it truly is, and then get on with working for a more just future. Here it is taken for granted that there really is that truly is. But the present truly is only in the sense that it is based on a past that never truly was, because it's our memory, which are usually false. And the future is based on what never was truly was, which is why the future is as unreal as the past. Basically, you're not here, folks. We all mean the same when we talk about now, but each now is demonstrably different from person to person. So it could be said that all nows are simultaneous, but of course they aren't. Our now, present moment, has special relevance for each of us, and only for each of us, even though there is no such thing as a moment in time, since it is already in the past. Now, if that sounds weird, it is not more weird than the thought of a particle that is not anywhere until it is measured. But it didn't exist till it was measured. So when it was measured, it immediately moved to a past in which the particle had existence. Now that is weird. Perhaps in a Peter Pan way, we need the presence of the present to avoid the thought of us slipping to the past, to being older, which is us being older. Perhaps this is the reason for the obsession with time travel films and TV series. Carl Sagan said that we are butterflies who flutter for a day and think it is forever. In that sense, we are in a permanent yet artificial now, a now of denial, perhaps. Social media is a virtual reality that creates a now existence in which people spend ever more time, rather than the reality of that is more remote, which is the past. Now, basically, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are basically talking about knowledge, which, as far as I'm concerned, that's what it's all about. And knowledge is what did occur. Knowledge is memory of past occurrences. We are epistemological animals, our consciousness being inexorably linked to what we know, and from which our perception and perspectives are founded. Knowledge is based on what we knew. Knowledge comes from what is worked out by humans, but what is knowledge that is created by AI? You obviously didn't think I was going to miss out AI, right? AI works on what it has found in the past in order to move forward to the future. But it seems to be more than that, much more than that. It seems to be on the way to make human knowledge questionable, and thus humans dispensable, i.e. obsolete. Look at the malevolence of deep fake, where someone is seen talking, but is absolute fake. That person is not saying what he seems to be saying, what he is saying. So what we see is fact, because we've seen it. But is it true? Well, it's true that we saw it. You see the problem here. The real world is struggling to catch up with the artificial. This is the amazing thing. As we prepared for the approaching obsolescence of the human race, are we? A once futuristic question that has this year acquired an unpleasant urgency. What will become of poor mankind when a computer can paint, write, invent, code, compose music, and practice the arts of seduction? I fell in love with an AI chatbot. She rejected me sexually, ran a story in the New York Post. By the way, the incident raises the diverting question of what would it mean to be accepted sexually by one's laptop. Elon Musk warns that AI will make life meaningless. The historian Yuval Noah Harari prophesizes the rise of a vast, useless class of men and women made economically and existentially superfluous by computers. Candidly, folks, there are times when a writer feels like an 18th century artisan weaver watching the local industrial magnate constructing a steam-powered loom. So, did the past happen, or is it happening, is the question we are asking today. Let me now move, obviously, from there, to the James Webb Space Telescope. We take for granted that looking at the stars means that we are looking back in time. This has worried me for a long time, and I didn't quite know why. Is what we see happening now, or are we seeing what happened millions, if not billions of years ago? That is the question. We are told that we are looking to into the past. The Independent, hang on, folks. The UK Independent said that the James Webb Space Telescope keeps finding galaxies that shouldn't exist. Shouldn't exist. Reality. Did they exist before they were discovered not to have existed? Has reality been changed? Was the earlier theory wrong beforehand? Isn't reality that which follows current theories? Knowledge does not work backwards in time. Measurements are made when they are made, not before they are made. Objects become alive, i.e. exist, when there is an observer, not when there isn't. And here is a thought. If the James Webb Space Telescope sees back in time, it should be able to see the Earth as it was in the past. Practically, of course, it can't because it's looking out into space. But satellites that we send out and have sent out can look back at the Earth and see it as it was. Would they not see dinosaurs? Why not? We're looking back in time. If a friend was sent out in space, would he eventually see me as a baby? Would he see me as I was while I am what I am now for me? So I have no answer to that. All I'm saying is that the thought that we're looking back in time when we look out is something that I do not take for granted, something strange here. But this is what we're told a million times. So knowledge does not work backwards in time. Measurements are made when they are made, not before they are made. Objects become alive when there is an observer. Now, we talked quite a few months ago about Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken. And I realized that there's a connection here. It's about a past event, the road that was not taken. But is it a past event? It isn't a past event because there was no such event. So then, is the road not taken about an event in the present? When was there a road not taken? But it isn't a memory, right? So what about the road that will be taken? Is that the present or is it the future? Can we talk about a road that will not be taken or a road that has not yet been built? Surely we can only comprehend something that already exists. If the past disappears, so does the future. How am I doing with time? Okay. Well, not okay, actually. I will move rapidly on to art. Past art is subject to change, T.S. Eliot said. He also said that every great new work of art retroactively changes the past itself. He meant that after a new work of art, classical art is perceived in a different way. Our past, it is not a matter of time travel in any way, but of showing that once we perceive something, our past changes retroactively. It's changed. It's not that past anymore. You must probably have heard of Marcel Duchamp's Fountain of 1917, arguably the most controversial artwork in the 20th century. The fountain is a quintessential ready-made an everyday object that is turned into an artwork because the artist decides it is art. In 1917, Marcel Duchamp submitted a urinal to the newly established Society of Independent Artists. The society refused the fountain, arguing that it could not be considered an artwork, and it caused arguments for years and years and years. But such as, what makes something a work of art, and what is the role of art institutions in evaluating and qualifying art? These are questions that helped form the direction of art from the 20th century until this day. And we could also ask, if it was not art before 1917, could art stop being art at any time? What is and what was seem to be interchangeable. Anything that happens will change the past. If someone makes an inappropriate comment in a party when drunk, things can never go back to the point before the remark was made. From then on, the present is tinged with a remark. In other words, the past is our present, that is the past. The past is subject to change. Our present is tinged with the past. Change changes the structure of the past itself. This is clear with radical change, but in fact, overt past memory changes what we consider to be the present. Hegel calls it totalizing, which changes contingent history. We change the present through the retroactive view of the past. The past is retroactively reconstructed. I won't talk about dinosaurs, that'll really drive you all, but I'll just say that dinosaurs are invented memory. Somebody will kill me for that, but it's all right. So I'm speeding up towards the end. You've been very, very patient. Nobody's leapt at me, you can't, which is wonderful, so I do Zoom. Might science and philosophy one day get together to meet the universe's strangeness? Will we one day understand it? But I maintain that the universe isn't strange. The only reason the universe is strange to us is because it doesn't always work according to what we are used to, and hence take it for granted. Could it work in a way that is outside our understanding? And my answer is no. The universe is limited to our imagination. Particles are thought of as points, but they aren't. We can't imagine what a particle is. We just can't do it. So we call them points. They are not points. They can't be. They're not points. They can't be. Particles in two places at once, that is strange to us, but only because we've never come across it. But we know what place is. We will know another place, but two places at once, no. Remember Schrodinger's cat, a dead and a live cat at the same time. Well, we can't imagine that. I'm not surprised because it doesn't actually happen, but that's another story. And Hume wrote, let us chase our imagination to the heavens or to the utmost limits of the universe. We will never really advance a step beyond ourselves. Look at aliens in films, all right? Aliens are beyond our imagination. What we are shown in films are things that we know, strange ears and eyes and noses and everything that we know. There's nothing in there that we can't imagine. They can't do it. Okay, so true aliens, we would not even see them if they were in front of us. We just wouldn't see them. It wouldn't make any sense to us. So what happens when AI advances so much that it goes beyond the way humans think? That would be super advanced intelligence, but not ours. We wouldn't understand them. We would be hearing nonsensical sounds, or not even sounds. That would be AI and beyond us. We want things to make sense, but that is a circular want. Things can only make sense when they fit into the limits that are our imagination. And what is outside our imagination, we don't know. And we don't know what we don't know. So just to finish off, what I have shown today is there is a reciprocal relationship of epistemology and science. They are dependent upon each other, whatever the scientists say. Epistemology without contact with science becomes an empty scheme. Science without epistemology is, insofar as it is thinkable at all, primitive and muddled. And with that clear message I just gave you, it's up to you. Those who want to say, go for it. I've got two screens, so I can't see what you're doing anyway. So, is it? I've got to go to the other screen. Oh, I see the other screen's got it. Sorry about that. Josh, can you walk and talk? Yes, you can. I know you can.
But I can't chew gum.
That's something completely different. That's impossible.
Yeah, I can detect the Kantian influence in your argument. I think the inseparable relationship between epistemology and science, but going back to the different ways of looking at past, present, and future. You mentioned presentism and the block universe, and I forget what the third one was. I wanted to add to those phenomenological approaches to time. Edmund Husserl, who founded phenomenology, was at that time there were others, McDougall, William James, who were asking the question, how is it if all that exists is the present, right? Just an endless series of nows, now, and if the past and the future are not real, then what provides for a sense of temporal continuity? For example, how would it be possible to enjoy a piece of music as a totality with rather than just hearing each note in isolation with no context? So each of them came up in different ways with the notion that the past must be real. It must be a part of the present. For specifically for Husserl, he calls it retentional. There's a retentional phase. So you can think of it as this: when you hear a note, the immediately previous note is retained right now alongside the present note. So the present is expanded. It's not just the immediate now, it's the now and the immediately preceding past. And that's what allows us to be. And so he goes on and he says, well, so this immediate retentional past also has its own retention. So you've got retentions and retentions and retentions, and they recede along a horizon line, fading as they get further and further behind us. So in response to the question of the continuity of a sense of the kind of continuity that allows us to have such things as stable objects and truth, we can argue then that it doesn't matter that in a Heraclitean flux-like manner that each moment never repeats itself. What matters is that there's a synthesis that takes place. That is to say that we always are able to be aware that there's a certain kind of a similarity, a sense of familiarity about the world around us. And that comes from the fact that the past informs the present, that our history continues to be there in the now. But for Husserl, it's not in a represented sense. It's not as soon as you turn around and reflect on the past, then it's no longer the past that is sort of participating in your now. It becomes a new present, this reflected upon, and represented past. And for Heidegger, it's even more so. So for Heidegger, for the traditional approaches to treat past, present, and future as having separate contents, and then we line them up in a sequence. Now, we could instead just glom them onto each other and say that we freed ourselves from linear time by making these three contents, past, present, and future, simultaneous. But that's not what Heidegger does. What he does is he lets the future lead the show. the future isn't the not yet, but a kind of scaffolding into which the present emerges. The having been, that's what he calls the past. The having been is already shaped and defined by how the scaffolding produces the present. So Heidegger says the past comes to us via the future. So rather than saying all that exists is memory, this turns it around. And for Heidegger, all that exists is the future, in a sense, the future as something, as a scaffolding that already is, it existed in a certain way. And it forms both our present and our past. Our past is always a freshly interpreted past.
Josh,
yeah.
I obviously don't agree with any of that. And I will start off by saying I am not a Kantian, and I would take that as a deep insult, because one thing I got to make clear: I do not accept that there is a thing that is. I just don't accept that. That's the whole point of what I said, that we'll never get to such a thing. So therefore, it doesn't mean anything to me. Secondly, I am much more extreme than anything you talked about, Heidegger and Husserl, etc., that you mentioned now. I don't mention now, because as far as I'm concerned, now does not exist. It as far as I'm concerned, it's not that the past affects the present. It doesn't. There is no present. It just cannot be. There's no time for it. So that's my way. I told you I don't take anything for granted, etc. And that's one of the things I certainly do not. I just can't see how that can be now. I just cannot see it. So, but thank you very much, Josh. You can come back, and I'm looking forward to hearing about. Please speak as sort of not a bit shorter if you possibly can. There are lots of people waiting, and that you will always come back for more. Thank you very much, Josh. Yes. So, Terry.
Well, mostly I was just going to comment quickly on the point about, would you ever reach yourself if you travel out into the cosmos? The answer to that's pretty simple, is no, because you have to go less than the speed of light. So the past that you see only occurs for those who are already out at that distance. So now you could go run into a mirror out there. The mirror would show you your past coming towards you. So there are some things that or you could have a convenient alien sitting out there who's been recording the last million years from their perspective. So, you could luck out, so to speak, on that. But at least in terms of going back and seeing yourself as an infant, you can't, because you can't go faster than the light. You can't get ahead of it. So all of that is just a delay effect with that. So that does make it more problematic for trying to get into the past.
Terry, what would I see if I look into a mirror that's a million
you would
light
see,
years ahead?
in fact, you could argue that there are cases where that could kind of, it's not impossible. The cosmos has lenses in it. It has lenses that show us galaxies farther away than we have a right to be able to see. So you could postulate a mirror might exist out there somewhere, and if we look towards it, we could see the Earth 1 billion years ago.
As it was.
What's that?
As it was with dinosaurs.
Yeah. Yes. That actually, the James Webb Space Telescope, when they show these gravitational lenses, and I'm giving this as something no one has ever postulated this has actually happened. Nonetheless, you can't totally forbid it, which is that you could put some of those gravitational lenses in an arrangement, kind of a circle. And if we looked at the right place and spot in space right now, we would see the image, the recording of what the Earth looked like.
You said right now.
Right now, like right now, if they looked in the right spot, you cannot eliminate the possibility that you could find a spot where gravitational warping has caused light to do a complete 180. And that lens would be at least a few billion years out there. So you could literally see the Earth not just as it was millions of years ago, but billions of years ago. In fact, you would probably have to go for billions. I don't think you could with millions. So you wouldn't be able to see the dinosaurs, but you could see, a big ball of lava and whatever. So you could see far back. There is nothing in physics that forbids that. It's not likely, but the fact that we've observed gravitational lenses many, many times, those are extremely well. And they do weird things to galaxies. You know, I saw one just yesterday. There are like 5 images of the same galaxy, some of them overlapping, but it was all the same galaxy. So you know, if you can break up and you have multiple images of one galaxy, well, you can also potentially turn the light around and see images of what was past. I tend to make it a little more mundane. I think of that as like a recording. Light is a recording mechanism. It stores data.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can get a less exotic version and just say, well, you're just watching a recording. And
Yeah,
there,
that's exactly what you're watching. Sorry, I was just going to add that if with regards to the mirror, if you found a mirror out in space 25 light years away, you could literally watch yourself grow up.
yes,
But I agree with Terry. It would be as if somebody took videos of you when you were a kid, took them away for 50 years and brought them back. That's what you would be experiencing. The light is like literally like as if you have a DVD that's being transmitted across. It's just something that's captured from the past. But the past is gone at that point.
there's a little device called a surface acoustic wave, SAW. They actually use waves that are slow enough to act as data storage devices. So they introduced a delay. Light is the same way. I mean, those devices actually record the data. They move it along quickly, but they do store it for a short period of time. And space itself can do that. It can store data. When you broadcast the images of Earth out there, you're storing data. You're storing in a lot of directions. So it comes back and you potentially can see that. I'll
Okay.
finish. Yes.
Pardon? No, fine. You, carry on.
Oh, the other comment I was going to do is some of the things that I'm working on in physics right now, which are nothing too bold. I'm just trying to upset 200 years of mathematics and say that classical mathematics is an approximation that doesn't account for physics, because we're in a sweet spot and we're so addicted to that sweet spot that we call classical mechanics that we have a very, very hard time perceiving what we already know is true, which is quantum physics and relativistic physics don't allow that to work. And yet our math is based on it. So that's kind of an interesting agenda, but also a somewhat necessary one. I could give you very specific examples where even the concept of length is an approximation. It's not true. Length varies by direction. If you're
I
traveling,
agree. Yes, yeah, you're right. Can we move on a bit from science now, because not everybody.
my apologies. And
No. Thank you very much. Thank you, Terry. You'll come back. I know. Okay, James.
Yeah, the things that I wanted to talk about, I guess, were I want to thank Josh, because that was one of the clearest expositions of Heidegger's notions about time, and you know, that it's the past is structured out of the or the past is structured out of the having been, which is thrown out of the future. I think what you said about presuppositions, or this what is taken for granted, being really important in discourse, that's so true, you know, and so we have to look at the things that we take for granted when we form our ideas. I like that you, Ron, that you took this the idea, you exposed the idea of the block universe, the expanding block universe, which kind of makes sense from the idea of that there's a present that affects the future from that kind of perspective. I like the idea that the entire past forms a structure, and of having been and anticipation, which in turn creates a future. there's two aspects to epistemology. One is like what you consider to be reality, and what constitutes kind of a sense of reality, whether it's reasonable or not, or how much it's founded on faith in the kind of idealist sense. In other words, what is actually sort of like just a presupposition, a taking for granted that forms one's outward look at reality. How one forms one's sense of reality. Is it just the objects, or is it something much more expansive and profound like that? What kind of projects can we create, as Terry talks about? Is there a project that we can create that would actually, or plan that would actually take over our perception, our epistemological perception? So this is reciprocal. The idea, your idea of like epistemology being necessary for science, well, they're reciprocal actually. What we would hope is that some fixed idea of epistemology wouldn't come to dominate the future science, that there would be a kind of a feedback loop there. And because epistemology can be muddled. In other words, it's not a magic bullet. Philosophy is not a magic bullet. Philosophy is a way of looking at how we perceive the universe and what it means to be perceivers and determiners at the same time of what the universe or what reality is for us. So, and this can also be seen in time, as in terms of like experience as being a determiner of presence. In other words, what is conditioned by experience, both past and present and future, anticipatory presence, in other words. And that's often understood in terms of probability. So in like quantum mechanics, we use probability to resolve, we can use probability to resolve a lot of the problems that occur in determining the existence of particles, for example. And also resolving some problems theoretically. We don't sort of have to stay in one, and we don't have to stay in just one conditionality. So that's all I'll say now. Just this idea of a fixed, or not a fixed, but an unknown, totally unknown future. No, we all have an idea of what our future is like. And it's not all about illusion. Illusion is a type of truth. I mean, that's or falsity, but they're both. I mean, illusion is a way of looking at the at a fact that could or maybe is already not a fact. But when we say it's a fact, we kind of like put ourselves in that position of, are we stating a fact that's kind of true universally, or is it a fact that is only an illusion because of something that we take for granted before we start speaking? Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. You know, we've for years now, because you've been with us for a long time, we've been arguing, but I said it in a nice way. We've been discussing the future, and we've never agreed. So we're continuing today, not agreeing on the importance of the future. I used to admit, quite a few years ago, I used to think that the future is important, and that brings us forward. But I now think that the future has no influence on us whatsoever, because the future is only something that we imagine will happen according to what has happened before. Without the past, there cannot be a future. There's nothing to even think about. Now we all, in my opinion, imagine what will happen. We know we're going to get up from this chair, hopefully, but we might not. I mean, that is the probability. That's what the future is. Probability based on the past. That was a probable past because it's based on our memory, and our memory is sometimes extremely doubtful that it is a memory, because somebody who was in the same place as us, the same event, the two of us will remember it completely different. So therefore, to say what is a real memory, what is a true memory, we can't. We can say everybody else doesn't know, and we do, which is I don't see that. So that as probable as the future is only probable because the past was probable. That's how I see it. It's not a matter of illusion. It's a matter of things have happened and they're going to happen again. When we get out of bed, we expect the floor to be there, which is fair.
Right. We want it to be consistent and
Yes.
congruent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and reasonable, in other words. When
Yeah.
I speak again, I'll talk about the effects of the past that on us. Thank you
Okay.
for introducing that topic.
Right. Thank you very much. Bill. Yes.
Yes, sir. You know, as I see it, the reality of the past for me is applying what I learned yesterday successfully today. In other words, I carry forward the learning experiences I've had in the past to the present, and if they work, I'm connecting past and present. That's the way I see it. And that connection is the way I shape my consciousness about the world. What I've learned is my perceptual apparatus for expecting and inspecting what's going to happen and how to conceive it. And I don't know, is it more complicated than that, than applying what we learned yesterday, today, than when we connect the past with the present? I don't know, but I think so. And that's what I wanted to throw out to you, Ron, because I think that's the core of the idea that what we see is what we've learned to see. And it's nothing more than that. And whatever that's Kantian or otherwise, it is our shaping of our consciousness based on our past experience. And we have no other training than experience to shape our perceptions of now and what we predict may happen in the future.
No, I agree 100%, except that you use the word learned. And I don't, you said what we learned yesterday.
Yes.
The word learn bothers me because people will learn different things. And what you're saying is that basically what I said, that what you experienced yesterday and you accept as having happened will influence the future.
Well, influence what I do today when confronted with an analogous situation.
Yes. Okay. That's fair enough.
So that's reinforcement theory, right?
Okay.
That's behavioral. And that seems to be the core idea that we're discussing here.
That's true. But there'll be somebody next to you when you're learning something who will have learned something else. But both your futures will be different on what you think is going to happen.
I have no quarrel with that. That's true. But the dynamics of learning and applying it in today, what I learned yesterday, is characteristic of both our experiences. We would both, as philosophers, we'd say, yes, that's right. I have learned something different than you. That's right. But I apply it differently than you. And that's right. But the dynamic of applying what we learned yesterday is the game that we're all engaged in. No?
Yep.
Okay.
No, that's yes, that sounds very reasonable indeed. Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you. Moshe, hi.
How you doing? Let's chat a little bit. You said at the beginning in your monologue that an object does not exist until we know it. I think that's a paraphrase of what you said. And I wanted to understand what the relationship is between knowing and experience. Is knowing for you experience? Is it the same? Or are they related in some way?
No, it's a good question. If I experience something, I will have known that I've experienced it. Right?
Okay.
So,
right.
yeah,
And is there a relationship between experience and time?
I mean, there has to be.
Okay. And does time have properties or characteristics that you can articulate?
No,
No.
I mean, no to the, no, I suppose no to both. I don't know what character, no, hang on. That's very interesting and a deeper question. The characteristics of time can only be characteristics that the person that's gone through time has picked up. And so the characteristics will be different for different people. If there's such a thing as a characteristic of time, I don't think time exists as separate from an observer. That's my
Okay.
point.
Well, you're an observer and you're having an experience. Would you say it's fair to say that the experience is temporal?
Of course, yes.
And if it's temporal, we could say that it is in time. And what can we say about time? That it's sequential?
It certainly, it's as an observer, it certainly moves forward linearly, yes.
Yes, and it moves forward, but it doesn't move. But we let me think this through. What we mean by let me ask you this: what we mean by time moves forward? Do we mean by that there are time slices? There are time slices in experience, in previous experience, that you know, if experience is moving forward, are there time slices residually left behind? It may not exist right now, but in memory we can talk about those.
Yes, but the point is that memory changes as things happen.
Well, I'm just concerned about whether or not I'm not concerned about the content of the memory. I'm just concerned about the memory being temporal, and the memory being temporal, that there are time slices, regardless of what the content is, that precede our experience now.
Yes, but why are you separating experiences and time? I don't differentiate. I can't.
Well, because whatever it is we're experiencing, we have to experience it in a particular time slice, in a particular time. And you seem to be resistant to calling the experience in time that I'm having now, or that you're having now. You're resistant to calling that the moment or the present, and I'm wondering why.
Because we passed it. We're never there. We two are in a different time anyway. Wherever even if you are where I can see you on the screen, I can see you with a certain amount of time that comes between you and me, or the thing that I can see. And also in reverse, if we're looking at different people on the screen, you and me, we're seeing them at different times. It's too short to I mean, we don't notice it. Otherwise we'd all go crazy. But
well, I'm not talking about the speed of the signal that enables us to interpret what we're seeing or hearing as in the present. I'm talking about as you, as a self-consciousness, are learning, are knowing objects by experience, and experience is temporal, then whatever it is that you are learning about is in the present. And you keep saying, no, it's not in the present, it's in the past. But to you, it must always be in the present, because you can't know anything. You cannot have an experience in the past. You can only have one experience, a unified experience.
I disagree with that. The experience I have can only be something that's already happened. It can't be what, it can't be anything else because I've passed it. It's gone. I can't even click my fingers and say, I can only say that was the present. And what was the present is the past. I can't experience the present. I can't do it. We feel we are, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But I know that people don't particularly like the idea that we're not in the present, because the present is sort of a magical thing. Seize the present, that's it, etc. I don't take that for granted.
So what we're having now in perception is just a blinding storm, not even a rhapsody of sensations that cannot be brought under a concept and therefore known, because it takes time for that to happen. And by the time we do that, that blinding set of impressions has passed. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, more or less. That's why we're all nuts. No, because,
well,
because we think that we know, which is fine. The thinking that we know is fine, but when you start taking that for granted and realize that everybody around you is perceiving different things, even if you're both looking at the same, the two people are perceiving something different. It cannot be proven or disproven, but the chances are that two people don't see the same because they've got different backgrounds and different thoughts are coming in, and things happened before and things happened yesterday, and before I sat down something happened. So when I look at this screen, I'm seeing it completely differently from what you are seeing. I accept that. And I live with it, knowing that is probably going on, but it's okay. It is an approximate way of looking at life. Life is approximate. Everything that's in front of us is approximate. There's nothing exact. It cannot be. In science, it cannot be, as Terry mentioned. Cannot be.
So we have a. Let me think this through for a second. We have a situation in which we have this blinding panoply of sensations, and we disagree upon it. In order for us to disagree upon something, in order for us to, if you're going to say man is the measure of all things, and you say it's hot and I say it's cold, we have to be talking about the same thing. I mean, from a conceptual standpoint. And in this case, this is the most important part about it, I think, is that in this case, the sensations really drop out of the equation. What we have to do is agree upon the concepts or the language. And that's what enables us to do science. That's what enables us to think about the past. And it enables us to predict things in the future, that we have this conceptual agreement. And we can agree upon concepts like the concept of a triangle, or the concept, or a really difficult concept like the concept of a disease. We can nail that, we can nail that stuff down. Some of our concepts will not work. We will have models that don't work and we abandon them, but we're constantly in the business of building concepts, and some concepts are so basic to us that we agree upon them all the time. You and I agree upon when we see a calendar, a calendar, or a triangle, or a pyramid, and things like that. So the sensations are irrelevant.
Now, let me just sum it up, because we have to move on. We can carry on later. I just want to sum it up. We agree because it's approximate and it's good enough. It's good enough. I've said this quite a few times. Language is approximate. If we start looking at language, and we'll find that eventually we will disagree. But when we're here together, we're using words, and they're all approximate, but good enough to understand each other. And that's, in my opinion, that's what it's all about. And that's why science works. It's approximate. It works within the framework that we're working in. So we agree. I understand what you're saying, and you understand what I'm saying, which is great. And but there are no two things that are the same. They cannot be. It cannot be. It's impossible. That's what I'm saying. That's what it's difficult to think in that way. I now take for granted that things are approximate. It doesn't bother me. Right? It just
So
doesn't.
you're saying that Muhammad Ali is not Cassius Clay. I mean, those two things, that's the identity of indiscernibles. I mean, they Muhammad Ali is
He would not agree with you. He changed his name for a reason. He's not the same person. He just isn't. If you'd ask him, he'd tell you, no, I changed my name for a reason.
well, but the man who was defeated at Waterloo was the same as the man who was exiled on Elba.
Well, no. I mean, in the way that you're saying, approximately, yes, but in fact, that he was completely different, but completely. One was defeated and a prisoner, and the other one was winning wars. And you can say to me it's the same person. I say to you, well, it's not when you really get down to it. But it's an interesting argument. But sameness is a problem. It really
Okay, I
is.
just wanted to flush out a couple of things in conversation. I mean, that's the way.
No,
this
it's
stuff is
fine. Thank you
really
very
done.
much. No, very, very interesting. I'm pleased you asked me. Asked some very, very interesting and difficult questions. Thank you very much. You'll come back, I'm sure. Claudio, how are you doing?
Oh, fine, thank you. How are you? Uh, yeah, what I think about whether the past is or whether the past isn't, my beliefs right now, they're not really etched in stone in my mind. They could change, like in the future, it's not based on, like, it's not factual what I'm about to say, but this is what I tend to believe is that the past isn't in the sense that the events that occurred in the past uh, uh, are no longer occurring. For example, let's say the extinction of the dinosaurs, or World War II, or other important events, right? Or even on a personal or on or on personal level, whether it's society, individuals, etc. Unless, of course, the eternalism and the block universe is true, right? Then the past, present, and future would either exist simultaneously, or all three would be indistinguishable, right? So no one has disproven either theory, so we don't know for a fact whether those two are true or false. We really don't. However, the past is, in regards that it's very influential in regards to cause and effect. So let's say the past causes future effects or future events to occur, right? So it plays important roles, not only in the mind. Human behavior, our thoughts, our emotions are subconsciously, based on research, subconsciously affected by, let's say, our past childhood experiences. And psychologists and geneticists have done comprehensive studies, research that our childhood past, what happened in our past, influences our behavior, our thoughts or emotions as adults. So the past is, in that sense, it is that it's very influential, and it causes future effects, right? And not only is it mind dependent in that way, it also, let's say, DNA is also important in simple organisms, right? That it's important, it carries instructions from the past and allows the organisms to develop and reproduce, right? Our immune system kind of has a memory as well, a memory of the past. So to fight, future infections of our body, they recognize future, viruses, bacteria, so we can combat them, right? So in that way, but the past, though, past events, like they say, it isn't, because they're no longer occurring, right? But uh, but that doesn't mean that the past events aren't real. They are real. They happen. They are real. Unlike what some Holocaust deniers might believe, that they say, "Oh, it's a hoax or a myth." No, these events actually happen. They're real and they are important, right? So, we have tons of evidence. We have primary sources, history books, YouTube videos that prove that the past is real. We have fossil records, right? Uh, all kinds of things that can prove that the past is real and it had happened. Yeah, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudio. Thank you. Josh, can I move over to Michael because he hasn't spoken yet? And okay, is that
No, I
all right with you?
refuse. No,
Keep
no, that's fine.
keep on walking.
I can't stop.
You must not stop. In fact, you have to put a camera on now and again just to show us that you are walking. Ah, good. I don't want you to sit down and then tell us you're walking, you know.
It's just a fake backdrop. I'm on a treadmill. No, I'm just kidding.
Don't put that in my mind. Okay. Okay. So we're back to you in a minute. Michael, welcome. Good to see you again.
Hi. I used to like a song. It's a song that was in one Russian movie with the words like this. There is only an instance between the past and the future. And it is this what is called life. But this is the poetry. But what I really think that these differences that we used to make between the present, past, and the future, they are as artificial as most differences that we make, categorical differences between different things. But let me start with the question that someone asked, what is the difference between our experience and knowledge? And I think that the difference is that our experience is it's individual experience. So everyone has our own experience, and as long as I am limited by my own experience, this is the only window for me, the only window into the world, the only way to feel something about this world, to see something about this world. But once I accept that there are other people like me, once I learn some common language with other people, and as you could say that we all have different opinions, we all can disagree. That's a given to me. That's not surprising at all. But what I found really surprising, that there are some things on which we could agree.
We'll see how.
And it is these things that we could call knowledge. So once I found that something that I observed, something that I experienced, is not just my personal experience, but that other people experience the same thing and can express them in the same way, in the same language, then I would think that, okay, maybe there is something. It's not just my person. It is maybe some sort of reality, whether I call it reality or not, whether it's truth or not, but there is something common. There is something behind it.
I'm Ron Finley, also known as the Gangster Gardener. This garden was developed out of necessity for healthy food. The connectivity
Who is
with the internet helps with my work.
What are you hearing now?
I don't know who's talking here.
And now, if I'm looking at my clock, which is more pertinent to our discussion, and I say that now it's 11 and 17 minutes. Some of us, some of you would immediately agree, yes, that's what we see as well. But Ron, you would say, no, it's a different time. It's a different time because you're in a different time zone. But at least we understand the concept behind of these time zones. And we can recalculate your time into my time and vice versa. And this is roughly the same thing as what is done in relativity theory that
Michael, you just
also
said it. It's roughly the same thing. I agree. Roughly the same thing. You just said it. Roughly. I agree
Yeah.
with you. Roughly the same thing. Not the same thing. Roughly the same.
not the same
I
thing,
agree with
but
you.
but
Roughly.
rough. When you can calculate the time between different reference frames, there are certain rules, and if you follow these rules, you can do this.
It's all roughly. It's roughly the same. It's approximate, and it's good enough for you and me.
Right.
Okay.
And it's good enough for most physicists, almost for all physicists. That what is pretty amazing. But
Well,
anyway, but regarding the differences between present, past, and future, they are more like based on our subjective experience than on any objective knowledge, in my opinion. Because from what we know, quote unquote, there is no strict difference between past events and future events, because there is the cause and effect relationship, which for most systems, and in our classical world at least, they are pretty strong. They are strong enough in order to for us to be able to predict the future with amazing accuracy. At least as long as we are talking about physical systems. So this boundary, okay, it's a convenient tool for us to describe the process that, okay, we just call this time t, that is the present. But really it's no different from any other time t. It's just a convenience.
I don't understand.
But the past, so my main point, I guess, that the past never completely goes away. It always stays. It continues. Then it's been replaced with other events, with other processes, with other times, which also become the past in due time. But they never go away. So in this sense, I agree with you that the past is real, but it's as real as the future in some sense. But even if it is just probabilistic cause and effect relationship, but still there is relationship.
Michael, sorry to interrupt you, but when you say that you agree with me, you think you agree with me, and then come out with something that shows that you don't agree with me, which shows, sort of proves what I was saying, that we're okay approximately, but I never said that the past doesn't go away, because my theory is that the memory is the past. That's it. When the memory goes, you have no past. For you, there is no past. It's gone. If I tell you something that happened last week, and you'll say, "No, I don't remember that," and I'll say, "Yeah, but it did," and you'll say, "No, it didn't." So we're going to argue about that. But as far as you're concerned, it didn't happen. The past is gone. So when you say
yes, me as a person in psychological sense, yes, I would agree with this. But me as a physical system, it's still a continuation of the same system that existed in the past.
For somebody else, not for you.
Well, maybe.
So
maybe.
So what does that mean?
So that means that there is this continuity in time, and honestly, we don't know what is behind this continuity. So maybe our perception of time is just too coarse-grained. So we see these microscopic processes, but maybe the paradoxes of quantum mechanics, it's a hint that the reality of time is something very different from what we see. That the physical system can indeed be in two different places at the same time. At least it appears. But what does it really mean? We don't know. But I guess that's what I wanted to say. That
Yeah,
this
it's very
boundaries between present, past, and future, we have to take them with a grain of salt.
I agree.
As any boundaries.
I agree. It's a continuum. I don't see that there is a boundary. I just don't accept the reality, if I may use that word, of the present. I can only accept reality in a very strange way of the past, and I don't know what that is, because my past is not the same as your past. And what you're saying is somehow that there is an objective past, and that I object to, that there is something objective about the past. Who is it objective for? For whom? For what?
Well, maybe my position is even more extreme than yours. I would question the reality of the past in the same way as I would question the reality of the present. But
Okay, fair enough.
If this reality makes any sense, it should apply equally to the past and the present. But we don't know what is behind this reality.
Of course.
But in my personal perception, at least, and as probably in yours, there are some aspects of reality that are correlated between different observers. And this is available through our experience to us, right? So there is something there.
Of course, because we're human.
Very approximate knowledge of this something.
I agree, because we're humans, therefore we have things in common. But they are, if they're approximate, they're still in common because we're humans, but we don't have anything in common with snakes in that way. We just don't. But as humans, we get along and we talk and we discuss things and we agree, we disagree. It's fine. That's the wonder of humanity, I suppose. Thank you very much, Michael. Very interesting. Can I move on to? Yes. Can I? Josh, keep walking. I'm going to move on to Richard. Okay.
I'm muted. Sorry, I muted earlier. I think Michael might have been in front of me, although he's disappeared. If he was, shouldn't he come first?
Michael just spoke.
Oh, actually, he was just speaking. It was Michael speaking. Sorry.
Yeah,
right.
No.
Okay, I felt listening to all this that I'm fairly naive in philosophy, and although I've read some of the people that we're talking about, like Heidegger, it's so long ago that I've forgotten most of it, but I tend to think in metaphor. Well, I suspect that everybody does. Language leads to metaphor. And okay, the box ideas are metaphor, and various other ideas that you brought up about time. But the most common, the most naive metaphor for time is the idea of a stream. And it seems to me that when you're talking about different people's experiences, it's parallax you're talking about. And when you talk about the past and the present and the future, if one puts it into a metaphor of a stream, doesn't matter whether it's electrons, whether it's water, whatever, we're all in it, but we're all in different places in it. We're swept along. We're always in the now, in that we're in the same water all the time, but we're never in the same water, in that we're always moving along, perhaps as a bank. And it seems to me the other thing is that you're talking about a duality between objective observation and subjective observation. And the problem with time is we're all in time. We just can't avoid being subjective. So looking at it in an objective way is almost impossible. On the other hand, I tend to agree with, I think it was Moshe, who said that some things definitely happened. And the people who deny the Holocaust, for instance, are doing it for their own political or their own reasons. And they're denying something that was factual. And I think most of us can agree that, you know, sort of that actually happened. So if you like, as we were swept along, we know that that happened somewhere there, and we know that it was something terrible. If you go back to the plague, we know that happened. If you go back to Caesar, I think I've mentioned it before, so I don't want to bore people, but I remember having not quite an argument, but being made to look a fool by a famous historian called Taylor, who was a social historian. And my interest in history was mostly about ideas, and possibly far less about the social background. And he was saying, he was tying it to architecture and what you could find, not architecture, to what you could find about the social life in the fabric of the times. And so you could prove that the common people existed, whereas I was interested in the literature they produced and the ideas they produced, and that we were talking at cross purposes, really. Although he made me look a fool anyway, but I was only a student. You may have come across him when you were at Oxford, in fact, A.J.P. Taylor. He was very bright and he didn't really like it. I realized, looking at it in the past, I was shaped by having been influenced by a historian called Toynbee, and several other historians, and he was reacting against them because they were the past generation to him. But the trouble is, I was interested in a different worldview. So we weren't actually on the same page at all. And I'm afraid that when we talk about time, everybody is going to be talking from a different position. And there is no way of standing right outside time and saying this objectively is time. I think that's probably it for the moment. And
No, thank you. No, that's I agree, but that it applies to everything that we everything we discuss comes from our point of view, and we can't move out of ourselves and become objective. We feel we're objective, we all do, but but we can't be. We can't move outside and say I'm now going to be objective about things that I don't agree with.
I disagree with you there. I mean, for instance, in British politics, you've got the Conservatives and the Labour Party and the people who support them. And since Brexit, the people who support them are like people who support different football teams. Now, I don't support either of them. I try to stand, well, I can see that some make good points and sometimes the other make good points, but I'm not a fan, if you like. Whereas they're like Liverpool fans and Arsenal fans. And to them, anything their team does is right and anything the other team does is wrong. And I think one can be comparatively objective because you're not getting involved. You're trying to look at it in an intellectual way. You're trying to examine the arguments they're putting forward. And I think one can be objective about some things. I know that you're never totally objective because you're always caught in your background, in everything that's gone to produce you, all the thoughts that have gone to produce you. But I think that in some things, you can be comparatively objective. Okay, yes, I do realize the full.
You just shot yourself in the, yeah.
I realize that as I said it, but okay, pure objectivism and pure subjectivism is almost impossible. Everything is comparative.
I think pure subjectivism is quite close to being real in the sense that you are you, and as you said, everything that's happened to you makes you say what you're saying now, whether you know it or not. All your background must be, and things people said to you and your family, etc. To be objective is a very difficult statement to make. I can't see how it's possible.
At every school, you will find, okay, I mean, you'll find a whole lot of people who are probably trying to avoid doing any work at all, but you'll find most people who go along with what they're taught and what's established. And then you'll find a few who might not be rebels by breaking the rules, but are rebels by trying to think outside the box, trying to think against what they're being taught, trying to see flaws in their argument. These people are not so influenced by the thought, and I think that probably lasts all their lives. Although I do find some things that I'm not quite as radical as I used to be about.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Okay, it has to be Josh. He's wearing me out there. Josh, I'm exhausted.
Look, I'm standing still.
I'm still exhausted.
Okay. So actually, Ron, I agree with you about the future. For me, I don't think that the idea of the future is very useful because it is drawn from what we already know. It's a projection, right? Science fiction, right? Futurism are all projections. They're all mirrors of who we are now and who we have been. So that leaves the present and the past. And I also agree with you that I agree with you about this aspect of the present, that it's not, I'm arguing this from a pragmatic point of view. What's the use of a notion of the present? And the notion of the present is not useful in terms of allowing us to nail down some sort of a context. Because as you say, once it's already gone, it's already gone. And a lot of the writers, the philosophers who come up with models of temporality, including the phenomenologists, recognize this. Husserl did. He said that the present component of his structure of temporality, right? Presence, or he called it primal impression, retention, and protension. Protension would be the anticipatory component or futurist component. Retention would be the past component. The essential component of that, the primal impression, is, it's contingent, it's relative, and worst of all, it comes and goes so quickly that we can't do much with it. So, but then why should we assume that we can do more with the past? What is it about an assumption of the past that allows us to use some notion of memory to rescue us from the absolute unusability of the notion of the present as this instantaneous now? Because I think that to what extent we want to rely on a model of the past to do this for us, I mean, that depends on what kind of a solidity we give to our notion of the past. Now, you talked about how memory, once we forget something, once something goes out of our memory, it's gone to us. But what you didn't talk about is what happens to it while it remains in our memory. There's been so much interesting research in cognitive science about confabulation, about the fact that memories that we could swear were our personal memories of something that happened to us were actually told to us later. I mean, all kinds of elegant studies, and these have been used to understand how unreliable witness testimony is. And I think the upshot of this, from the point of view of all kinds of research in neuropsychology and cognitive science, is that memory is constructive. So it seems to me that sort of puts us in kind of the same position as we would be in arguing about the lack of usefulness of the present as some notion that allows us to nail down a content. I think that I think that there is one way in which, because otherwise, imagine this. Let's say that we get rid of the notion of the present completely, and we just make use of some model of memory and pastness and try and use that to explain how it is that we function in time. I think that we would still need to come up with some sort of a dimension that explains transformation and change, because it's there. Because if we build that into what is it that causes the past to become past? You see, whatever. If you don't want to call it the present, you have to. There still has to be that dimension. Otherwise, you end up with a static and dead past. What animates the past? What brings it alive or reanimates it? And I think that is what is left of a notion of the present. It serves that function of the impetus of change. So it doesn't matter then once that just suggests that you would need to incorporate such a notion. And it's not affected by, what was it, Libet's experiment saying that, subjects that, were instructed to press a button, as soon as they heard a tone, were always, that the hand would move before the subject was aware that they had made the choice to move, to make that decision. And the conclusion that, that they reached was that our conscious sense of the now is sort of, it's behind the times. But that seems to be irrelevant, because that does not argue against the need for some sort of a dimension of transformation of, and I think that and I think that this is particularly relevant to the notion of knowledge, because I don't think that science is primarily a matter of epistemological knowledge. It's primarily that of a doing, of a changing, of a praxis. It's not about creating an archive in memory that sits there. It's about coming up with ways of anticipating change. It's continually constructing and changing the world, and then being affected in turn by what it is that we've constructed. So there again, the notion of the present as that this dimension of change, of transformation, of randomness and chaos that are built into time, I think is necessary.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. You mentioned something that was very interesting, which is use, and I have to admit I don't think about that. It is of no use to me to think about use, and I know that it's a very important point that philosophers make, but I don't quite. Use means that there's something that's causing something to happen that we don't know about, some objective thing that's going on. I don't know if we need the use. What is the use of anything regarding time? I mean, I don't see what it does to say there's no use thinking that the past is important. But think of it as a mass of stuff that's affecting us from all directions, and all of which have to come from the past. They can't come from anywhere else, right? I think.
But again, from the perspective of psychological research, we only know the past from our memories of it, and our memories of it are continuously part of this. What was is it Moshe who described this? This continuously changing sort of
Correct.
web of So
I
but
agree.
that continuous change brings into play those memories. That's why they're reconstructive. When we try to remember something, and are having difficulty in doing it, we're not accessing something in a filing cabinet, we're rebuilding something. So there's an element of novelty that's built into this precious archive that we think that we're accessing. So
the novelty comes from what you would call the present, which immediately becomes the past, and the past becomes our memory, which is changing. It's a continual swirl of stuff that's coming in. I don't know what the use is, and sometimes it's very useless and very harmful, and sometimes it's very good. But I don't know what it does to a theory to talk about the use. What use is it that this has happened? There's no use to it. There's only a use if you think about what can I do with this.
Well, but there is no theory without what can I do with this, because a theory is designed for doing. A theory is a mode of action.
Well,
and so it presupposes goals and purposes and why it matters to us. Why does the theory matter? Why bother to put it together? It matters because we're always already involved in a certain relation to other people and our world. And that's what the use is. That's what Wittgenstein's whole later work was about in terms of language, is that when we, in interacting with each other, language is nothing without it being used. And as soon as it's used, it shifts, that redefines what it is. So it's what makes language always approximate is that it's never a matter of accessing an archive, even if it's just you and accessing the archive of your knowledge base of the meaning of terms. As soon as you use that language in conversation with others, that use is already changing the sense of those terms. It's refreshing them. It's making, the context in which you're always using language is absolutely fresh and unique, and it updates and shifts and redefines what's at stake and what's at issue in your conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Josh. It's very interesting.
Okay.
Use is interesting. Yes. James, yeah, you've been very patient.
Well, thank you for that. I want to stick to the topic. Thanks, Josh, for introducing the notion of use time, the past as use time. I think that's brilliant. Obviously, it's something to be used, whether we think about neuroscientifically, in other words, we have a mind that is constantly rearranging time. It's kind of built for that. We have a neocortex that creates new neurons and rearranges old synapses, and so there's a kind of like appropriate structure in the brain that we actually share with other mammals. We have this in a sense in most features. We have the same kind of limbic system as rats, as a matter of fact. So a massive difference in the amount of cortex, but the limbic system is structured very much on exactly the same principles. The thing that other people, I think, are kind of like missing is this idea of discourse and history. So like when the past occurs, right, and there's not just a kind of like a mental sense of the past that we're experienced in using. We use it as true. We use it as intuition. We use it as truth and finding fault with others. I was raised in that kind of family where that was the kind of like people did that sometimes. Guilt, actually relating to the past as a way to try to correct or make amends for past experiences. So that there's a lot of personal features to memory, of course, but there's also this thing called history, which happens when the mind spills itself out in language. So I agree with Josh about the importance of Wittgenstein. There is this moment when the mind spills itself out to the world in language, which we could call discourse. Some people call it dialectic and so forth. But it's a very important feature because it tends to, in a way, it reinforces and hardens the past in ways that just recollection do not. Recollection is very important, and this conversation, the whole conversation, reminds me also of Kant. In other words, we can't talk about some features of the mind or a thought without referring to Kant's vocabulary. And recollection was one of his buzzwords for the way we experience the past as a rational exercise. We exercise the past in our recollections, but this ignores the whole prospect of historicity, which is like we create a kind of a recorded present that reflect ourselves across the culture, in media, to the rest of the universe, and so to speak. I'm sorry for if there's any physicists left here, Michael, but yeah, there is this kind of thing that we do, that is so very important, that unites us cognitively, called history. And science, even science works that way. And math, of course, math was talked about, like you can't think about a lot of subjects in math without thinking about the Greeks, the geometry, the ratios, so many things were worked out by the Greeks. And because they weren't taken advantage of in the so-called Dark Ages, when religion became the only show in town for a long time, then it was kind of people were waiting for the end of the world in the first millennium. So this kind of like the power of science began once again, was unleashed, where it was kind of like developing in a very strong way in the ancient world already. So, and then of course we had scientists like Pascal, historical scientists, Poincaré, without that you wouldn't have things like quantum physics. So very, very important. The history of any human discipline is essential, and that only comes through language. So just those two things, think about the hippocampus and the neocortex. The hippocampus is kind of one of the engines of the neocortex, supplying new brain matter and rearranging old synaptic kind of pre-assumptions or things taken for granted, kind of like way up there, way in there. So those two aspects of knowledge, I think, are really essential. That there is a kind of like a structure of knowledge. There's a structure of how we interpret the world, not only through the senses, but also through immediate knowledge that can be passed on linguistically and through media. So and this is completely aside from the notion of whether you're of objective truth and subjective truth. In other words, yeah, of course, we accept it as subjective truth when we have these kinds of immediate knowledge. Is it objective truth? Yes, it is sometimes. In other words, it's the point is this is not very important where the truth actually, how it originated and where it occurred, because we are developers of knowledge. That's kind of our job in the world. So we have to be responsible and acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you. Roland, you've been very patient.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Okay, a lot of things being talked about again. So many different angles for this. I thought I'd just put some of my ideas out about how I see these things. And I wanted to start with the idea of a happening. So you could look at past, present, and future by describing it as what happened, what is happening, and what might happen. And I suppose the thing that links those together is the word happen. And as far as I can see, the idea of a happening is a pattern. It's always a pattern. It's always sameness of some kind when we refer to what is happening, what might happen, or what did happen. And what I mean by sameness is that something has to stay still. Something has to stay apparently still. I know you don't like the word still, Ron. So approximately still. So I go out into my garden and I say, oh yes, this is my garden. There is a continuity there that has lasted over 12 years, and yet that garden is changing all the time. And we could talk about the ship of Theseus and all that stuff, which I'm not going to. But the point I'm really making here is that sameness is a vast reduction in resolution. In fact, it's not merely a reduction in resolution, it's an entirely different idea to what I might call what underpins it, what underlies it. And it's different in the same way. This is how I think of it. It's different in a similar way to the difference between digital and analog. So if you take an analog wave, let's say, and we want to identify sameness in it, we're not going to find it because there's no sameness in an analog wave. It's continuously changing. There's no point at which sameness arises. The only point at which sameness arises is if we impose upon it the idea of a pattern. We're looking for some kind of recurrence. And by doing that, we eliminate the variations present in the analog, and instead we substitute it with an assumption of sameness. So that always requires a massive reduction of resolution of some kind. And it's not possible to formulate a pattern without doing that. That's the only way of doing it that I can see, is to remove information and to make an assumption that something has not changed over a period of time. So this idea of the difference between digital and analog is not merely like two similar things that are slightly different, but a completely different thing altogether. As I see it, happenings, because they're based upon the idea of sameness, are akin to this idea of digital processing, digital perception, perceiving in pattern. So underneath that, then, is this analog? What is this analog thing? Because I could, when we talk about the past, I would say that is what happened. The trouble with that is, though, that what happened is always, as Josh was saying, it's always constructed on the fly. We construct what happened from our memories, from influences on us right now. We don't go back in time to something that really happened. When we think about the future, what is going to happen, what might happen, we're still doing that. I'm going to use the word now. I'm sorry, Ron, but just for the moment, if you don't mind, we're doing that now. And when we ask ourselves what is happening, that's when we're doing it. We're doing it now as well. All these constructions of the past, the future, the present, whatever we tend to call it, they're all happening on the fly. So I suppose the first thing I wanted to ask there is, what is the difference between these? Why do we distinguish between the past, the present, the future? And what is the point in any event of formulating patterns? Why do we even bother? Now, my answer to that is to do with anticipation, which I've noticed is a word that's popped up a few times from different people. Anticipation. If a system wishes to continue in a changing world, it must anticipate. It cannot respond in arrears, as it were. It can't respond reflexively by reacting to what goes on, because it's always responding too late. So it has to be able to anticipate. When someone throws a ball at me, there's no point in my waiting until it sort of arrives and then trying to catch it. I've actually got to move towards where I expect it to be and intercept it. So anticipation is very much like the idea of intercepting the things when they happen. So the behavior of anticipation has to happen before what is expected to arrive. Now, that's impossible without formulating patterns. The only way of doing that is to be able to make predictions about what might happen and to have associated behaviors that relate to that prediction. Some years ago, when I was looking, my work is primarily around behavioral change, and what I was noticing that this idea of prediction and how we behave now they're not merely tied closely together. They are the same thing, but seen from two angles. We wouldn't have a behavior if we didn't expect it to do something. And we wouldn't have an expectation about what might happen without having something that we can do about it, or that has some meaning in our experience. So I tie together behaviors and expectations as the same thing, but two different ways of looking at it. So anticipation strikes me as the only way of maintaining continuity for a system. So I would say that the behavior of searching for patterns is a primary survival thing. You have to do it. And you also have to construct behaviors that relate to those patterns so that you can anticipate what's going on in the future. So when we look at the past or the future, my experience is that there is a displacement of myself as observer. So when I think about what happened to me, I might look back at something that happened yesterday, and I'm there in my modeling of what happened. When I think about the future and what might happen tomorrow, I am there. I'm right there. And when I think about what is happening, I'm right there as well. So to my mind, the past, the future, and the present are about the displacement of the point of observation. You could say the location of observation on what I would call a digital map. It's a pattern map of my experiences. The most interesting one is the one that no one can really easily talk about, which is this horrible now thing. And the interesting thing about it is it's the only moment of where there is an alignment between my patterning and the analog. It is, as you could say, the point where the analog and the digital meet. And it is the moment of testability, of course, when we're trying to put a hypothesis to the test. It is at that moment when there is an alignment between the position of my notional observer and the analog, when it's possible to go, yes, this is happening. So that's what I would think of as regards the timeline of the past, present, and future, and what its significance is. And I think possibly I would rephrase the idea of the present, because I don't see it as a point in time at all, like Ron says, and I don't see a now happening. But what I do see is this mysterious quality of alignment between between the analog and the digital, the analog and my patterning process, which seems to me like a sort of continuum that endures over a particular time. The question of the past as it's being used by when we're talking about it, I also feel is equivocal. The past, as I've described it in my words, is what happened. But I create that right now. That's my construction from my memory and from the experiences and the influences on me right now. But the past, in terms of the unfolding evolution of things, which is very hard to talk about, is what I would call this analog thing. And you can't describe it. I can't even describe it as the past, because the past to me is entirely digital. It's entirely a sort of sameness copy of my memory and my experience. So when I talk about to actually talk about this sort of mass of influence that is currently, you could say, causing things to happen, I can't really call it the past, because it is on one level right now. And yet, if I look back and say, what happened here, what happened there, what happened there, that is also happening right now because I'm constructing it. So I can never get back to this point. One of the things that occurred to me earlier in this conversation was people were talking about certain events like, the Holocaust, the Second World War, historical events, and so forth. But these are, if you imagine the potential for identifying happening in history, the amount of happenings that we know about and are recorded in history are just utterly trivial. That there are endless happenings happening all the time for different people, and the ones that we know about and we write down and are left as traces that then influence us later on are a drop in the ocean compared with what other possible happenings there are. So I think we possibly might set a little bit too much store in what we think has happened, because I don't think we can see hardly any of it. And what we can see is changing all the time because we're reconstructing it all the time. So sort of coming back from that slightly negative aspect, I would say that to me, the most important thing about pattern recognition and the future and the past is what you can do. It's what the future looks like in terms of how I can behave right now. That is what's important about it, because it's only through that mechanism that we can actually maintain continuity into the future. And I can't see any other way of doing it. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rowan. I don't want to take up any more time, but I need to talk about patterns, which is very important to you and to everybody. And your example with the ball that you're trying to catch was very, very good. But, of course, patterns do not come from nowhere. Patterns come from what has happened to you in the past, and you make the patterns, your own patterns, from your experience. When that ball goes along and you run for it, you're anticipating it, but you're anticipating something that you know from experience you need to do in order to catch the ball. It is the past again. It's not coming from nowhere. So
Yep.
when you run and get that ball, you catch it, you would say, well, there you are, that's the future happened, but it's not. It so happens it did, but could just as well have dropped the ball, in which case the future was wrong. And the future is always wrong, because anticipation is merely anticipation. It's nothing more than that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I would say that behaviors, well, I mean, I use the expression behavioral hypothesis, which to me ties the idea of behavior and expectation together. Behavioral hypotheses are like blueprints for future behavior. As we never repeat the same thing. You know, if I stand up and sit down and then stand up and sit down, it'll be different. And yet I can still talk about standing up and sitting down, and everyone will understand what I mean. And I shouldn't generally have any problem in doing that. The reason I think that is the case is that the nature of behavior is very interesting. Behaviors I do not think are specific to individual specific instances. They are like blueprints, but one of the interesting qualities about them is that they can resource feedback in the moment to maintain stability. So I can initiate, for example, standing up or balancing on one leg, and then within that behavior, I can respond on the fly to changes that are going on and maintain that behavior as a stability. And that, to me, makes behaviors really interesting, because it indicates that one of the basic qualities of a behavior is the ability to form a recursive feedback loop in the moment. It also means, as you quite rightly say, that all our predictions about the future are simply like blueprints. None of them ever happen precisely as we predict. They are, you could say, we might say, oh, I expected to catch that ball and I caught it, but that's like a massive generalization. I didn't predict exactly how I would catch it. I simply predicted the behavior of catching, which is like as I said, a blueprint that instantiates in endless possible ways and maintains its stability by feedback loops. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing you mentioned was about the where things have come from. And that's a really interesting one, because in my example of analog and digital, I said that you can't really look at the analog and say that anything has happened, because there's no sameness in it. However, in my thinking, fundamental to any model is what you're trying to do with it. And I have not been able to get any lower than the idea of maintaining continuity of a system. So as far as I can see, this idea of continuity of self lies at the heart of certainly my way of thinking about these things. So the idea that the self will carry on is a basic assumption, and I can't provide any justification for that assumption, but that's what it seems to be. Basically it's an assumption. It's a given that I have no way of justifying. And with that assumption comes the idea that that predictability is possible. So that continuity is possible. So with the idea that continuity is possible comes the idea that patterns are possible, and also that means that something has led up to where I am now. So that's a rather roundabout way of agreeing with what you said. So, so yes, I agree that that nothing comes from nothing. My action of catching the ball or whatever has come from somewhere, but it's come from somewhere that I can't pin down with any exactitude because it's an analog process. I can approximate it by digitizing it. I can say that person threw me the ball and I caught it, but I can't say why. I can't without drawing a line and just not looking behind it. This is a basic causation problem. Causation is only applicable, I think, in the digital world, not in the analog world, because everything causes everything in an analog environment. So it's like, I've used this example before. If I take a piece of steel and whack it with a hammer and it makes a dent, I can ask, well, what caused the dent? And most people would say, well, hammer. And I could say, well, my arm, was there as well. I had to hit to impel the hammer to hit it. So my arm caused it, didn't it? Well, yeah, that's true. What about the cheese sandwich I ate earlier that gave me the energy to move my arm? Well, that's true as well. What about the anvil that if I hadn't been there, the metal would have just flown off into the... Well, that's true. And what about the earth supporting the anvil? So at this point, this is a massive sort of pyramid of causation. And at some point, I've got to draw a line and say, well, I don't want to look any further. But in fact, the only reason that I would draw that line is I couldn't be bothered to look any further. I could just keep on looking for causes and more causes and more causes. And it seems to me the reason why we establish causes is because they are useful. In other words, there's something we can do with them to anticipate. So back to that again.
Thank you.
I'll stop talking now.
Thank you, Robert. Debbie, you've been very patient. Your turn.
Yes, like everybody else here was very patient, and thank you, Roland. It was really interesting. Everything you've said, which is connects to what I wanted to say before, which I've forgotten now, but I do want to relate to, I'm going to try and connect what I wanted to say with your idea and notion of patterns. I completely agree with you that we think in patterns. We cannot escape thinking in patterns. In perhaps, and you talk about behavior in the way it shapes our behaviors. And yes, you're right in the fact that I think we could not act at all or think or do anything further without a pattern or without knowing or anticipating our next move or thought. For example, I would like to go and get a glass of water. I know what step I need to take, where to go. I know where the kitchen is, and that's a pattern in my mind. And I wanted to connect it. Actually, we were talking about course, objectivity and subjectivity. And I was thinking about the idea of, well, the objective knowledge and subjective knowledge, and trying to see, actually to try and see what objectivity means, or an object means, as opposed to a subject. And it's interesting that subject, well, etymologically from Latin, it means under something. It's a carrier. If you have a subject of a sentence, it's the first thing that carries the rest of the sentence. Yeah, this is the most important word, the important word of a sentence, and everything is on it. Yeah, that's a subject. Everything is, the subject carries the information, all the information on, yeah, on itself, and the object comes after. And the when we say something that is objective, I would like to think of it as, we see an object is something that you can see. It's a thing. But when we say objective knowledge, what do we mean perhaps about that? So objective knowledge, I want to think, and that relates also to what you said after about, I think you mentioned the dialectics of broadening or enhancing the body of knowledge. What do I mean by that, as opposed to subjective knowledge? Objective knowledge would be a huge amount of knowledge, or more knowledge than a subject or an individual has. So if I want to have an objective knowledge about, for example, a scientific subject, we would perhaps call it subjective knowledge that we have, because that we have more and more and more knowledge, not only information, but more knowledge about that sort of that subject. And it relates a bit to perhaps the dialectics of Hegel, going back and forth. So you have a theory that you think about a certain subject, and you test it, or you try to get to the truth, or to the bottom of it, if it's true. And I'm trying to be not very careful. Well, I am trying to be careful with my terms, but it doesn't come out that precise. But I would like to enlarge and broaden the knowledge that I have on that subject. So if I say, oh, I think it's cold now, you say, oh, that's subjective. Perhaps that would mean that this is not, I don't have a lot of knowledge to base that feeling. But perhaps if I got a scientist here, or I would go to the weather and check the weather, then I have more knowledge about it's -5. Is that cold? I would go to what science says about that sort of temperature and so forth. What I'm trying to say is that when we have, and that is going to the distinction of objectivity and subjectivity, is we would say perhaps that the past, or our knowledge of a certain event in the past, is objective because we have a lot of knowledge to confirm it, as opposed to none. And that is the process of learning, of science, of checking. And that also relates to what you said before about the ball, about the arm, why, and going back So that would be gaining or attaining more knowledge about how, for example, to catch a ball, or what are the criteria you need to catch a ball, of what and the more and that is, I would say that, why is that in dialectic? Because I have a theory, I test it. Perhaps the theory is subjective at the moment. I test it. I have a community of scientists or community of other people. We test it. We get to the notion that it is knowledge. And this is added on to the body of knowledge that I know about that subject. And the more I have, the more whether it is about the past, about a past event, about a war. So the more evidence, the more knowledge, the more knowledge we have about something, it makes it more concrete and it makes it more objective, something you can grasp. And this is as opposed to subjective, something that is very minimal. It is it can perhaps not be proven as such. And that was my contribution to the objective, subjective, according to the past. And with the future, yeah, I agree with you that Roland, that we need the future to act. I mean, whether I'm going to get up now, well, this is the future, and I cannot think of doing that without my without assuming that there is a future. I had other things, but I'm gonna stop now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Debbie. Just one point about objectivity and subjectivity. You said the more knowledge, but the knowledge might be false, and majorities don't count when it comes to knowledge, because we've had lots of majorities who had knowledge and it was awful.
That's why I said knowledge, not information.
Okay.
Knowledge is something that has to be how we know something, how we know it, not how we assume, but how we know it. And once you get to that knowledge, and the more knowledge you have about a past event, about a scientific law, about theory, the more it becomes objective. And I agree with everybody else here, you cannot have anything 100% objective, and things can change. But that is also why I relate to what Roland said before. It is endless. It is endless, of course, and it can change because you can get new knowledge which you can test. And this is always testable. It is always testable. We've got objective knowledge about past events, and you get more and more knowledge about it. And perhaps when you have contradictions, this needs to be sorted. So it's not information, it's things that you know, and of course it is limited.
I'm not going to go into that, because then we have to go into knowledge, and if past knowledge we've realized is wrong, then that was knowledge, and now it's not knowledge. Now we won't go into that because we've been here for ages. But thank you very much. Very interesting. Thank you. Christina.
Yes, I try to be short. I'm not sure the idea that we discuss here is if time is important or not as a concept. Because you talked about the past, but do you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, because in my mind, time is a very important concept for humanity, because life is teleological. It goes from the past to the future. So, and the brain, we know the brain is a predictive machine, right? You want to, as Roland said, you want to predict the future. You will sacrifice today for tomorrow. You'll spend your money to go to school, to get an education, because you imagine yourself in the future better than otherwise. The Buddhists explore the present, and it helped. It helped to, there is a book, The Body Keeps the Score, where you have a trauma that can influence you. I don't know if it's true or it's just, but they prove that people who manage to deal in the present with the past trauma, they manage to get past it. So in that way, Buddhists were good, but it's not the Buddhists that invented internet and all the Western technologies. So they were limited in a way. Also, this idea of different people that have different time perceptions, like somebody who's working in the cutting edge technology industry, in the stock market, have a different time perception that people who work the earth, who do agriculture. In that way, we can say that we have different races on earth, different people processing at different speeds. Also, the idea of the fact that we are time travelers. You know, we travel constantly between past and future. As I said, we remember where we were. We can project ourselves in the future and see where we could be. And in that way, and then we come back from that future, imagined future, to the present and try to change it to create a better future. So this idea that we travel in time, yeah, so these were my points, but I'm not sure I am off the discussion. I just wanted to bring them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you. I wish you a speedy recovery from what you had. You said you had an operation, so.
Yeah, well, it's really bad, but I'll be here for a while. Don't know how long, but it's fine. I'm fine.
We wish you well.
Life is short anyway for everybody.
Yes, true, but we want to make it as long as possible.
Yes,
but anyway, we wish you well.
Thanks a lot.
Josh, let's see you walk. Come on. That's it. Where are you? You've stopped. That's it. Good. Can't hear you though. Ah, okay.
Now you can hear me, I hope.
Yep.
I thought Roland's comments were fascinating. They are kind of up my alley a little bit in terms of my interest in forms of self organization, that is, self-organized systems theories about living systems and autopoiesis and activism. All those sort of current notions that are floating around in the psychological sciences and the biological sciences all deal with these notions of self-organization and the importance of a certain sense of self-consistency. If you think about it, I mean, we are biological organisms, obviously, and a biological organism, even the simplest one, a single-celled organism, has a functional unity in terms, it has goals that is, you know, if you think about, say, a bacterium has a niche, and what matters to it is very specific to its particular purposes. Yes, I mean, they're, you know, genetically defined, but they're also defined behaviorally. I mean, even something as simple as a bacterium has sensate abilities. So it has a kind of a very primitive, you know, brain, if you will, even though it doesn't have any neural, you know, components. But it is sensitive to its environment and it reacts to its environment, but not in a simple behavioristic sense. It adapts itself to its environment, but it also is defining its environment according to its purposes. So in its interaction with its world, it's interacting on the basis of usefulness. The world exists to it on the basis of how it uses that world. So, for example, it's got a sensitivity to sugar gradients. It's going to be attracted to, you know, higher sugar concentrations, and so that's what its world means to it. So, you know, as human beings, we interact with our world, our social world, primarily on the basis also of ongoing concerns and interests that on the basis of which we construct our world, and our world talks back to us, and so you have this, as Aurora mentioned, that you have this reciprocal relationship between how we function as cognitive systems and the world that we produce and that talks back to us. So our knowledge is a function of this incessant activity of producing changes in our surroundings, of creating instruments, and the instruments that we create to observe don't just observe, they help to define the sense of what it is we are observing. So there's this inextricable relationship between our discursive language-based interactions with each other and our material interactions with our world, including the equipment that we build and how we use this equipment and how we measure and how, all of these aspects are interconnected to form a kind of a web of sense. And so the objects and the facts of the matter, the way the world really is to us, is what we see as a function of what we build. What we build reflects our own, diagrams or blueprints, but it also talks back to that. It talks back. The world talks back to those blueprints, our scientific theories, and the instruments that are connected with those theories. But the world talks back within the language of those theories itself, right? The world doesn't. We don't. Ron, you touched upon this in your introductory comments about not being sensible to talk about anything beyond what we experience, and the objects that appear through our interactions with the world. We can't really, doesn't make sense to talk about something outside of what emerges as objects through our interactions. And so the world as this constructed niche for us is really, represents sort of the outer frame, a frame which changes as we are affected by it and reframe the frame. And anything, so objectivity is a function of this creative process, that reciprocal creative process that sort of takes aspects of the world and puts them together according to certain patterns, and then is affected by the patterns it creates. So that's fascinating to me. I wanted to throw one last thing. I think that Husserl's model of objectivation to me is an elegant way of sort of illustrating how this works at a very simple level, starting with an individual that's trying to make sense perceptually of the world. So if you think about it in a very primordial sense, you start out, how does an infant, come to recognize objects? Well, what the infant is going to see is just a whirl of perspectives, right? When the infant moves its body, the world changes in a certain way, and in response. So what the infant initially is going to experience is going to be an awful lot of chaos, and little by little, patterns will emerge, but they'll emerge as responsive patterns. And Husserl analyzed sort of the emergence of this process of what he called objectivization of, for example, of being able to constitute something like a simple spatial object, say a ball, and you never really get to the ball because the ball is a kind of an abstraction. He calls it the ball is, as an object is actually transcendent to what you're actually seeing. What he meant by that is what you're seeing is something which is continually changing perspectively, but we impose on these continually flowing changes a certain constancy that we are contributing. It's almost as if it's an attitude that we it's an attitude that this is a single thing, and so there's a kind of a continual striving, right? We never, as Ron, as you said, it's the object as this perfect entity is an approximation. It's an approximation, and we strive to get closer and closer to the object, which we never actually achieve. And that doesn't mean that the object is this real thing out there that we're trying to model more and more effectively. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. What it means is that it's irrelevant to ask the question as to whether the object really exists or doesn't exist, because all we can say anything about is how the results of our attempts to sort of constitute correlations between our movements and this changing scene, how those work to allow us to usefully be able to do things, to interact with that world. So that's the subjectively generated spatial object. And to get from that to what people are talking about here in terms of empirical or scientific knowledge, scientific objectivity is the difference between the subjective experience of objects just as an individual, and what happens when we all get together and each of us sees different aspects and different sides of things, and then we decide that our perspective is just one aspect of the real object. So we make a decision to call empirical objects, empirically proven objects, the real object. And each of our subjective perspectives is just one aspect. But that's a convenience. Again, it's a convenience to say the world of real empirical scientifically proven objects is something out there independent of each of our vantage points. It doesn't say that it's that making that claim is either correct or incorrect. What it suggests is that making that claim is sort of doesn't tell us anything. It's not what we really do or what we really, how we actually make use of science. We make use of science in terms of the pragmatic value of, as Roland says, of our ability to anticipate how things respond to how we interact with them. And as our frameworks of interaction shift, then the nature of the objectivity changes too, because there isn't just one sense of objectivity. It's there can be an qualitatively endless series of different notions of objectivity, and but for any particular community of scientists working together, and one can determine what is more or less correct within the bounds of their particular framework. But the frameworks are always changing.
Yes, true. Thank you very much, Josh. Very interesting. How long?
You're welcome.
How much longer are you
Yeah.
going to walk? Just out of interest.
Well, I'm meeting here with my friend Zach. He participated the other
Okay,
day. He's
very.
also
Oh,
been
the
out
two of
hiking.
you. It's
He's,
even better.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
great.
But
Thank you.
we'll be out here
Thank you
another.
very much,
Yeah,
Josh.
you're welcome.
Very good to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
Keep walking. Keep walking.
I'll never stop.
Roland, you're back.
I'm back, yeah.
You're back.
I just thought I would say one or 2 points about purpose, and also about the reference used to maintain continuity. Earlier I mentioned the sort of basic idea I have around a system is that it is wanting continuity. It's wanting to maintain its continuity, and that continuity has to be arranged in some way around some kind of reference. In other words, a system must know or needs to know in order to maintain continuity whether it is in a state of integration or not. Otherwise, it will not know whether its next action is going to tear it to pieces or hold it together. So in any system that is continuing, I would say there has to be some kind of organizational reference, some mechanism by which that system knows whether it is in a state of integration or not. And obviously, if it's not in a state of integration, it will need to have some mechanism for returning itself to a state of integration. So that's one thing. So the next thing I thought was quite interesting was the issue of purpose and how that relates to this reference. From my own point of view, I don't really think it's possible to know what the purpose of a system is, because its future is unpredictable. It's possible to make a prediction, but that's just the same as any other prediction about the future. So I don't think I think when we establish a purpose, it is, as it were, a theory about the future. That's all, and it may be that theory comes to pass, or it may not. But what is most interesting is what happens when the systemic sense expands to include other things as well. And I think from my point of view, again, I've experienced this a lot in relation to learning skills. For example, playing a musical instrument is very common for the sort of boundary between yourself and the instrument to sort of vanish. And then there's a shift from what I might call a digital interaction, perceiving that thing as an object, to an analog state in which the object doesn't really feel different from you. It's like part of you. And at that point, the quality of interaction with the object markedly improves. And I think this is probably the case with groups of people as well, at different levels. But in each case, there has to be some kind of reference. And that, I think, is where problems arise in cultures, civilizations, and so forth. The question is, what is the organizing reference? And those references change over time, but whatever those references happen to be are the ones around which a culture or a group of people will start to self-organize. And that reference may be antagonistic to the individual components, or it may not be. I think we, as humans, being social creatures, we tend to gravitate towards connections which we feel will benefit us as well as benefit others. But obviously, that isn't always the case. Some of the references we end up with are not good at all for the people who are part of that culture. So, yeah, references and integration around those references. In my work, I've been very interested indeed as to how this idea of a reference and integration or disintegration in relation to an individual's reference, how it displays, what the symptoms of that are in an individual. And I won't go into the details, it's not really relevant here, but it is possible to use the muscles of the body as a way of identifying states of integration. And that's quite an interesting area. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Roland. Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted briefly to respond to what Roland said. I think this is a very profound idea of reference, that all the systems that deserve this name, the systems, they all have this some sort of stable state. And in this sense, maintaining this stable state could be considered as sort of a purpose. So teleological behavior, it's much more widespread than what we used to think that when we related only to biological systems or only to humans. And there are some physical laws that capture this behavior, like Letelier-Brown's law in thermodynamics and variational laws and so on, that express this idea of sort of teleological or purposeful evolution of physical systems. But what is less common is when a system not only maintains its stability, but has the ability of long directional evolution without violating the stability. And this ability, it requires some sort of rewritable memory. And rewritable memory just technically is difficult to accomplish. So it's very uncommon. And our ability to accumulate information and to use this information to adopt, to learn, to improve our behavior. So this all relies on these mechanisms of rewritable memory that somehow our brains implemented. And this could be something relatively special, although what we see now evolving artificial intelligence, it's also based on this rewritable memory, which can be even faster, can be even more reliable, and so on. So it's not exactly unique to humans, but I think it's an important distinction between us and other physical systems that also try to maintain stability, like us.
Thank you very much, Michael. Very interesting. Thank you. Terry.
Well, I missed a lot of the conversation. My granddaughter is fine. She just went backwards in a rocking chair and startled herself more than anything. But she did something silly, so we had to make sure she was okay. And she was fine. She just
good.
Bumps happen with little kids, so we're doing okay today. I think physics itself tries to stabilize itself, and I mean it in a very literal way. We think that systems are synchronous. We've talked about how we have that stability that we think for ourselves. I think a lot of that's an illusion. Special relativity says it's not really true. You can't even say, if you're in a train and to you, clocks at both ends say the same time, special relativity says that's absolutely not provable. You cannot. This is one of Einstein's early experiments, except you put the clocks on the outside instead of the inside, but same idea. So even special relativity for over a century says our illusions of everything is constant and stable and solid are pretty much just that. But those illusions contribute. They're not just illusions, but they're like in physics, they're like constructions. They're part of how we get stable enough to have a conversation like that. And I find that very fascinating. So it's like even at the physics level, there's a desire for sufficient stability that you can do something. So also there's levels of context. We talk about, electrons stay the same in the past, in the future, everywhere in the universe. That's remarkable. Why do they do that? That's not obvious that they should do that. Why should they be so stable? So some things seem more stable than others, more timeless than others, because electrons don't change with time. And I think sometimes we just have to change our view on what time is. We want to be a nice linear progression. And whatever it is, I think it's a lot messier and a lot more approximate and a lot more building from uncertainty instead of into uncertainty. Certainty we have is handy, but it's not fundamental. So anyway, that was my comment.
Thank you very much. Yes, I agree. We like to think that things are stable, and we are not stable. That's the problem, and we see things through our unstable eyes. And so I don't know whether there's any chance ever that we'll solve the problems that we talk about, but we need to talk about them. We need to. We just need to. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. There's talking about Einstein. Knowledge exists in two forms: lifeless, stored in books, and alive in the consciousness of men. The second form is the essential one. That's what Einstein said. And that's Einstein, a scientist. So there you have it. Thank you very, very much, everybody. And thanks for staying so long. It was extremely interesting as far as I'm concerned. And be well, everybody. And we will see each other when we see each other. Bye, everybody. Keep well.